I've cared for so many amazing women over 60 who wanted just one thing above all else: to stay strong, independent, and full of life. But I'll never forget one woman in particular. Every morning, she would wake up already exhausted. She told me it felt like her body was carrying a heavy blanket she couldn't throw off. By lunchtime, her knees ached so badly, she'd choose the couch over her garden. She loved her freedom, her routines, her little joys, but her energy was slipping away, day by day. As her caregiver, I felt her struggle deeply. I could see the frustration in her eyes when she whispered, "Maybe this is just what aging looks like." And that broke my heart, because I knew it didn't have to be this way. That's when I discovered the hidden culprit sitting right inside her freezer. Something so common, so ordinary, yet silently stealing her vitality. And once we uncovered it, everything began to change. Today, I want to take you inside her story, because it might just feel like your own. You'll see the simple shifts we made, the frozen foods that were draining her energy, and the ones that helped her feel alive again. By the end, you'll have a clear path to protect your independence and thrive every single day. Welcome to Women Caregiver Circle, where we share real stories, empathy, and simple solutions for women just like you. If you want to stay fresh, strong, and independent, join our circle by subscribing today. Let me take you into her journey, because I believe it may sound familiar. It all began with a woman I cared for who, like so many others, didn't realize how much her daily food choices were shaping her energy and mood.
Her name was Margaret. She was 68 years old, a woman full of warmth and determination. Margaret had a sparkle in her personality. You could feel it in the way she lit up when she talked about her grandchildren, or the pride in her voice when she told me about her rose garden. But behind that sparkle, there was a quiet exhaustion. She loved being out in the yard with her plants, but after just a few minutes, her back would stiffen and her legs would ache. She adored going for coffee with friends, but more and more, she found herself turning down invitations because she just didn't have the energy. Margaret lived alone, fiercely proud of her independence. She wanted to do everything herself, her shopping, her cooking, her cleaning, but that also meant she leaned heavily on frozen foods for convenience. Her freezer was always packed. Colorful boxes of microwave dinners, frozen pastries, and ready-made snacks that promised quick and easy meals. To her, they were a way to stay self-reliant without asking for help. From my caregiver's perspective, though, I could see the toll it was taking on her. I'd been working with Margaret for several months, and while I admired her determination, it pained me to watch her vitality slipping away. I could see it in the way she sighed when she had to sit down halfway through folding laundry. I could hear it in her voice when she admitted she was too tired to bake cookies with her grandkids. And honestly, as her caregiver, I felt torn. On one hand, I respected her independence deeply. On the other, I knew she was fighting a battle she didn't even realize she was in, because the very foods she thought were helping her manage her life were actually draining her body of the strength she needed most. That's one of the reasons I began sharing these stories here at Women Caregiver Circle, because every senior woman deserves to feel fresh, strong, and capable of living life on her own terms, not silently struggling in her own home. But before we discovered the foods that gave Margaret her strength back, she faced some very real struggles that many women over 60 will find all too familiar. Margaret's days often started with a sigh. Even after what she thought was a full 8 hours of sleep, she would wake up sluggish, her body feeling heavy before she even made it to the kitchen. She'd sit at the table with her coffee, staring at the garden she loved so much, but the thought of pulling weeds or trimming roses already felt like too much.
When she did push herself, the pain came quickly. A short walk to the mailbox left her knees throbbing. Climbing the stairs left her breathless. And meals, which were supposed to give her strength, often betrayed her. I remember her telling me about how she'd eat a frozen pasta dish for lunch, only to feel her energy crash an hour later, leaving her too drained to finish even the smallest household chores. Emotionally, it wore on her. She began to believe that this was simply what aging meant, that weakness and fatigue were her new normal. I saw the embarrassment on her face when she canceled an afternoon coffee date with her friends. I heard the hesitation in her voice when she said no to her granddaughter's request to go for a walk. Slowly, her social world began to shrink, replaced by long hours in front of the TV, not because she didn't want to connect, but because she just didn't have the stamina. As her caregiver, I felt her frustration deeply. I admired her pride, her fierce independence, but I also saw her slipping further into a cycle of exhaustion. And I couldn't help but ask myself, was this truly just age catching up with her? Or was something in her daily choices quietly pulling her down? When I looked closer, I began to see a pattern. Her freezer had become her lifeline. Microwave dinners for quick lunches, packaged frozen desserts to satisfy cravings, even snacks labeled as healthy, granola bars and breakfast sandwiches, were loaded with hidden sugars and sodium. To Margaret, these foods weren't indulgences. They were her way of staying independent, of not relying on anyone else to cook or shop for her. But little did she know, some of those very foods were slowly stealing the independence she valued most. The convenience came at a cost she couldn't see: her energy, her mobility, her confidence. That's when I began looking deeper, and together we made a discovery that changed her daily life in the simplest way. One afternoon, after watching Margaret push away yet another invitation from a friend because she was too tired, I knew we had to do something different. I asked her if we could sit together at the kitchen table and really look at what was hiding in her freezer. We pulled out box after box, bright packaging with words like light, healthy, and balanced. And for the first time, we turned the boxes over and read the labels out loud. Sodium levels that were sky high, sugar hidden in meals she thought were savory, preservatives with names she couldn't even pronounce. I'll never forget her face when I showed her that 2 of her go-to frozen dinners carried more salt than an entire day's allowance. Her eyes widened and she shook her head in disbelief. "I had no idea," she whispered. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't careless. She was trusting the marketing on the front of the box, just like so many women do. So instead of telling her to give up frozen foods altogether, which would have felt impossible, I showed her another path. We compared those boxes with bags of frozen vegetables, frozen berries, and simple cuts of frozen salmon and chicken. Foods that didn't need fancy labels because they were pure, nutrient-rich, and supportive of her body. I reminded her gently that it wasn't about restriction. It was about choosing frozen foods that gave her energy instead of stealing it. That knowledge alone gave her a new sense of control, like a light had switched on. And this is why I always tell the women in our Women Caregiver Circle, knowledge is the first step towards strength. Once you know what's helping you and what's harming you, you can take back your power. In fact, it's why I created my guide, Stronger Than You Think. It's written especially for senior women who want to stay fresh and independent with simple tools that cut through the confusion. You can find the link in the description below. But discovery is only the beginning. The real change came when Margaret started putting these new choices into her daily routine.
The first week was the hardest. Change always is. I remember Margaret looking at the frozen salmon I placed on her counter and saying with a little frown, "But it doesn't taste the same as pizza." Another day, when I suggested swapping her nightly ice cream for frozen berries with a spoonful of yogurt, she sighed and muttered, "I don't have time for all this." And in those moments, I didn't push. Instead, I reminded her gently, this wasn't about giving up her comfort. It was about giving her body back the strength she was missing. So we started small. One night, we baked frozen salmon with a side of mixed vegetables, just to try. The next morning, she stirred a handful of frozen spinach into her omelet. Slowly, the swaps added up. Microwave pizza turned into colorful plates of vegetables and lean protein. Ice cream was replaced at least a few nights a week with a bowl of blueberries and strawberries from the freezer. I stayed by her side through it all. Some days I helped her prep the meals. Other days, I just cheered her on from across the table as she took the lead. And with every little victory, we celebrated, not just the meal, but the choice, the moment she said yes to her own health. By the end of the first week, she admitted, hesitantly, that she felt a little less sluggish in the mornings. By the second week, she was walking to the mailbox without the same aching knees. I noticed her smiles came easier. Her laughter was a little louder. Even the way she carried herself seemed lighter, more confident. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't overnight, but step by step, her energy began to return. The couch was no longer her constant companion. The TV was no longer her default company. She was choosing life again, her garden, her friends, her grandchildren. And I want to pause here to say this. Every woman deserves support during these small but powerful changes. That's exactly why Women Caregiver Circle exists, so that no senior woman ever feels like she has to walk this road alone. And soon those small daily swaps turned into a transformation she never thought possible. The difference in Margaret's life was like watching a flower slowly open after a long winter. Before, her mornings began with dragging feet and heavy sighs. She would sit by the window with her coffee, staring out at her garden, wishing she had the energy to tend to it, but knowing she didn't. She turned down invitations, she missed out on laughter, and her world grew smaller with each passing week. But now it was different. I saw her step outside in the early morning, gloves on, trimming her roses with a quiet smile. I watched her say yes to an afternoon walk with her friends instead of retreating to her couch. And the day her granddaughter asked if she could come over to bake cookies, Margaret's answer was a proud and joyful, "Of course, sweetheart." I'll never forget the sparkle in her eyes when she looked at me one evening and said, "I feel like myself again." That moment stayed with me because it wasn't just about food. It was about freedom. She wasn't simply eating differently. She was living differently. Her independence returned. Her confidence grew. And her joy, something I had seen dimmed for so long, was shining again. And that's what I want for every woman watching this. Because for Margaret, food became more than just meals. It became her path back to freedom. And for you, it can be too. This is the gift I want every senior woman to feel. Not just surviving, not just getting by, but thriving with dignity, independence, and vitality. But Margaret's story is more than inspiration. It holds powerful takeaways that every woman over 60 can use right now. When I think about Margaret's journey, what made the biggest difference wasn't a complicated diet or hours in the kitchen. It was one simple shift: choosing smarter frozen foods. So here are the exact steps you can start with today. 1. Read the labels. Look closely at sodium, sugars, and preservatives. 2. Favor frozen vegetables, fruits, fish, and plain proteins. 3. Limit frozen processed meals, desserts, and snacks that seem convenient but drain your energy. 4. Balance your freezer choices with fresh foods when possible. And here's one caregiver tip I give to every woman I support. Dedicate one shelf in your freezer to energy foods, your frozen berries, spinach, salmon, and colorful veggie mixes. That way, you always have a go-to option ready without the guesswork. This isn't about restriction. It's not about giving things up. It's about making smarter swaps that protect your vitality, your independence, and your joy. Because every choice you make is a chance to reclaim your energy, just like Margaret did. And if this story spoke to you, I want to invite you into our Women Caregivers Circle. Subscribe today and join a community where real stories, empathy, and practical steps come together. Because no woman over 60 should have to walk this journey alone. Your freezer can hold the key to freedom, and your best years are still waiting for you.
If you're a woman over 60, or if you're caring for one, I want you to remember this. You are stronger than you think. Your health, your independence, your vitality, they are worth protecting, and they are still within your reach. That's why we created this space, the Women Caregiver Circle. Subscribe today and become part of a growing circle of women supporting each other with strength, care, and real stories that matter. Because no woman should have to navigate this journey alone. And if you're ready for the next step, check the description for my ebook, Stronger Than You Think. I wrote it especially for senior women who want to stay fresh, independent, and full of life. It's your guide to making every day stronger than the last. Remember, food is more than fuel. It's your pathway to thriving, to joy, and to freedom. And you, my friend, deserve nothing less.